They told me to sit down and shut up at my own family's dinner, said I was just the widow, as if I hadn't poured every ounce of myself into building this family from the ground up. I smiled, nodded, and quietly stood up. I didn't say a word. As I walked out, I could hear them laughing behind me, thinking I was just being dramatic. But what they didn't know was that I was already making my move. By the time the sun came up, their bank accounts were frozen, their homes were locked, and everything they thought was rightfully theirs was now legally mine. I wasn't done yet. Let me tell you the whole story, but first take a moment and, like this video, also hit that subscribe button. It will really help me a lot in this phase. Also comment where you're watching from. Thanks. My name is Eleanor Whitmore, and I'm 68 years old. To my family, though, that seems to mean I'm just the widow now. It wasn't supposed to be anything special, this family dinner. Just a few hours to talk about the future, ours and the house's. At least, that's what I hoped. But as I prepared, I felt the sting of being forgotten. I ironed my blouse twice, checked my lipstick 3 times, and reminded myself, don't let them see you cry. It was just dinner. Just my family. The same people I'd raised, fed, and loved for over 40 years. We were meeting at my son Daniel's house, the big one he and Claire bought with the loan George and I helped co-sign. Not that anyone ever brought that up anymore. The invitation had come with the vague promise of estate matters. I assumed it meant talking about the house, the lake property, the savings George and I had built after years of struggle. I even brought along a blueberry pie, the one George used to say was my best, hoping it might help lighten the mood. But when I walked in, it was like I wasn't even there. Daniel was already pouring wine, acting like some Napa Valley host, and Claire was busy rearranging something in the kitchen, clicking around in her heels with a smile that felt rehearsed. Not a word was said to me. Their son, Jack, nodded in my direction with that polite, distant look you give a distant relative you only see at funerals. The room was thick with tension, the air sharp with forced smiles and passive-aggressive energy. I sat down at the table, the same one I bought for them last Christmas, and tried to ignore the sinking feeling in my chest. The conversation was already underway. Daniel glanced up, his eyes darting to me only briefly before turning back to Claire. "We've been thinking it's best if we simplify things," he said casually, as though I wasn't part of the equation. It wasn't a question or a discussion, it was a statement. They didn't need me anymore. I took a slow breath and asked quietly, "Did you talk to the lawyer about the trust?" Claire, barely lifting her head, muttered, "You're just the widow, Eleanor. Maybe stay quiet for now." The room fell silent. I could feel the weight of their words sink in deeper than anything physical. They all laughed, lightly, like it was a joke, but the laughter was empty. A little chuckle from Daniel. A quick, knowing glance between Trevor and Claire. The sting of it all burned, but I didn't let them see. I kept my hands steady, even though my heart was in a vice. It was clear. They had already decided. I was no longer part of the family. I slowly set my fork down, the clink of it echoing like a loud signal in the silence. Without a word, I stood up. The air around me seemed to hold its breath. I didn't look back. I didn't say anything more. I walked to the door, their voices fading behind me. They didn't call out after me. They didn't even notice. As I closed the door softly behind me, for the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't expected. Peace. Real peace. They had no idea what I was about to do. I didn't say a word. I just stood up from the table, my hands steady, and walked out. No shouting, no accusations, no dramatic exit. I didn't need to make a scene. They'd already made it clear that I didn't belong, and I wasn't about to give them the satisfaction of seeing me beg for respect or understanding. Their voices faded behind me as I made my way toward the door, but I didn't look back. Not even once. I didn't need to. I wasn't angry. In fact, for the first time in a long while, I felt an eerie calm settle over me, as if everything had finally clicked into place. As I reached the door, I could hear their laughter, that empty chuckling they exchanged after I left. It was like they thought my exit was just a tantrum, a momentary fit. I wasn't crying. I wasn't upset. To them, it probably looked like I was just throwing a quiet little tantrum, the kind they could easily brush off. But what they didn't understand, what they couldn't see, was that my silence wasn't weakness. It was power. It was control. I wasn't going to give them the show they expected. I wasn't going to feed into their twisted version of what this family was. As I stepped outside into the cool evening air, the weight of their mockery felt oddly distant. It was like I had walked away from more than just that dinner. I had walked away from the years of being dismissed, the years of being treated like I was nothing but a relic from the past, something to be ignored, forgotten. I wasn't part of their plans anymore. I was no longer an afterthought, a token of charity that they could trot out when it was convenient for them. I was done. The sound of the door closing behind me was like a final punctuation, a full stop to the story they had been trying to write for me. Inside, they probably thought I was weak. Maybe they thought I'd be back, begging for my seat at the table. Maybe they believed I'd cry, try to make them see me, or explain myself. But as I walked away, all I felt was a strange peace, like I had just let go of something heavy I didn't even know I was carrying. It was quiet. The world around me felt muffled, as if everything had slowed down just for me. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was chasing something or begging for approval. There was no need for me to fight for my place in a family that had already pushed me aside. They had decided, and I had accepted it. But what they didn't understand was that they hadn't just lost me. They had lost the one thing that held them together, the one thing that made their lives stable and grounded. I wasn't the one who needed to fix things. They were the ones who would have to live with the mess they'd created. As I stepped into my car and locked the door behind me, I didn't feel anger or regret. I just felt free. For the first time in decades, I wasn't trying to be a part of their story anymore. I was walking away, not in defeat, but in quiet rebellion. They had no idea what I was about to do, or how everything was about to change. I arrived home late that night, my mind still racing. I hadn't been able to shake off the weight of the evening, the laughter, the cold dismissal, the way my own son and daughter-in-law treated me like an afterthought. I walked through the front door, my body heavy, like every step I took was being dragged down by an invisible weight. I felt numb, as though the world had stopped moving, and I was left standing still, waiting for something to happen. The house felt quiet, too quiet. It was the kind of silence that made you feel like something was wrong, like the walls were closing in, but I didn't have the energy to figure out what. All I could think about was how easily they had discarded me. The family I'd worked so hard to build, the legacy I'd helped create, it was all slipping through my fingers, as if none of it mattered anymore. But what hurt most was the way they had treated me. Not as a mother, not as a woman who had given everything for her family, but as some old relic, something to be tucked away, out of sight, out of mind. I couldn't sleep. I tried, but it was impossible. The images from dinner kept replaying in my mind. The smirks, the dismissive gestures, the way Daniel and Claire hadn't even acknowledged me when I walked in. I had spent the entire evening trying to pretend like it didn't bother me, but deep down, I felt a crushing emptiness. They didn't care. I didn't matter to them anymore. But I couldn't let it go. I had to do something. I needed to find some way to anchor myself. I needed to remind myself that I wasn't invisible, that I hadn't spent my life sacrificing for nothing. I thought about the study, Henry's study. I hadn't been in there in a while. Maybe there was something there, something that would ground me, something that would remind me of what I had built with George. So, I made my way to the back of the house, walking through the dark hallways, the silence pressing against me. The study was exactly as it had always been, quiet, comforting, filled with the scent of leather-bound books and old papers. I stepped inside, taking a deep breath. The room had always been his sanctuary. It was where he spent hours at his desk, reviewing papers, handling business matters, making sure everything was in order. It was where we spent long nights talking about the future, about the legacy we would leave behind. I never imagined that one day I would be standing here alone, searching for something that would remind me of the man I had loved for so long. My eyes drifted to his desk, cluttered with papers just like it always was. I felt a pang of sorrow. He wasn't here anymore. It had been months, but the pain still hit me like a fresh wound. But tonight, I wasn't thinking about that. I wasn't thinking about the grief that had taken over my life since he passed. Tonight, I was thinking about my family, about the betrayal I had felt at that dinner, about how easily they had pushed me aside, taken control, and thought I wouldn't notice. They had no idea what I was capable of. They didn't know how well George and I had prepared for this. I walked toward the desk, my hand resting on the worn surface, and began to sift through the papers. Bills, tax forms, old files. Nothing that stood out. But then I saw it. A thick white envelope wedged at the back of the drawer. My heart skipped a beat. It was labeled with my name, Eleanor, in George's handwriting. I froze. I hadn't seen this before. I had no idea it was here. What was it? I took a deep breath and carefully pulled it out, my fingers trembling as I held it in my hands. My mind raced as I turned the envelope over, examining it, trying to make sense of it. I couldn't help but feel a surge of curiosity mixed with fear. What could George have left for me that I didn't already know about? Was it something from the will? I hadn't heard anything about this. I felt my heart thumping in my chest as I opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of notebook paper, along with a stack of clipped documents. The handwriting was George's. It was neat, careful, exactly the way he had written everything. As I unfolded the page, my breath caught in my throat. The letter began simply, "If you're reading this, something's already gone wrong." I stared at the words for a moment, trying to process what they meant. George had written this for me. For me. It was like he knew something would happen, like he knew I would need to know this. My hands were shaking as I read on. I wanted to tell you sooner, but I knew if I did, you'd try to fix things instead of protect yourself. The boys, they're not bad, but they're selfish. Claire is worse. I saw it happening when I got sick. I made some changes. Everything is in your name now. The house, the lake property, the retirement accounts. You have full authority, power of attorney. They don't know. Don't feel bad for using it. Don't let them shame you into silence. And if they ever try to take what's yours, burn it all down. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I couldn't breathe. I read the letter again, slowly, each word sinking in deeper. Everything was in my name. The house, the property, everything we had worked for. George had known. He had seen it coming. He had seen the way our family was turning. He knew how Daniel and Claire would act once he was gone. He had set this all up for me. For the first time in months, I felt something else, something I hadn't felt in so long. Power. He had protected me. He had made sure I wouldn't be left defenseless. I stared at the documents, still unable to fully comprehend what I was holding. There it was, all of it, official, notarized, sealed with the stamp of our lawyer, Allen's. Everything was in my name, and I had the legal authority to do whatever I needed to. I wasn't some widow, some old woman they could dismiss. I was the one in control now. George had seen their greed, their selfishness, their desire to take what wasn't theirs. And he had given me the tools to stop them. The more I looked at the papers, the clearer it became. He had written everything himself, quietly, carefully, probably during those late nights when he knew what was coming but couldn't tell me. He had seen through them, through the way Daniel had been sniffing around the business records, through Claire's strange questions, through their attempts to subtly push me out. I wasn't powerless. Not anymore. A wave of realization hit me like a tide. They had been playing me for a fool, but I had been the one who had built this life with George. I had been the one who had stood by him, through thick and thin. And now I was the one who would hold the reins. I had control. I sat in Henry's old recliner, the one that still held the faint scent of him. My hands trembled as I set the documents down, but I wasn't afraid anymore. I was prepared. I knew Daniel and Claire would be shocked when they realized how wrong they had been about me. They thought I was just the widow. They had no idea what I was capable of. The house was quiet, almost too quiet. It had been a long time since I had spent the night here, in the stillness, with just my thoughts. But tonight felt different. The weight of everything pressed on me, but I wasn't panicking. I had learned to move carefully, to be strategic. I wasn't going to rush. The old me, the one they thought was weak, was gone. Now, with these papers in my hands, everything had changed. I wasn't just the widow anymore. I was the one in control. I picked up the first document, feeling its weight. It was the power of attorney, signed and sealed. Everything George and I had worked for was now mine. Our house, our accounts, our legacy. It was almost surreal to see it in black and white. For years, I had fought for recognition. Now, I didn't need their approval. I had everything I needed in these papers. I could feel the calmness in my chest. This wasn't about revenge. It was about standing up for what was mine. Daniel and Claire would fight me, I knew that. But the difference now was that I wasn't going to back down. I wasn't going to be silenced anymore. I set the document aside and went through the rest, carefully checking the signatures, dates, and assets George had secured. It was clear he knew this moment was coming. He had protected me. I ran my hands over the papers, feeling their weight. This was my future, my legacy, and I wasn't going to let them tear it down. With a steady breath, I called Alan, our lawyer of over 30 years. "Alan, it's time," I said, my voice calm and controlled. He didn't ask questions, he understood. "I'll be there at 9, he replied. I exhaled slowly, knowing tomorrow would be a long day. But I was ready. I wasn't afraid anymore. The storm inside me had calmed. Tomorrow, I would take control of what was rightfully mine. And no one would stop me. The act of signing these documents felt like it should be a monumental thing, but it wasn't. It wasn't a moment of triumph or celebration. There was no outburst of emotion. It was just a simple, quiet act that solidified everything I had worked for. I picked up the pen and signed my name without hesitation, the weight of each stroke pulling me further into the realization that I wasn't just signing away assets or properties. I was signing away the illusion of helplessness that had followed me for far too long. Alan watched me carefully, his expression neutral. He didn't need to say anything. He knew the magnitude of what I was doing, but he also understood that I didn't need the fanfare. This wasn't about proving anything to anyone. It was about making sure no one ever took anything from me again. After I signed the final page, Alan reached for the documents and gave them a final once-over. His hands were steady as he read through them, the same practiced professionalism he had always displayed. When he looked back up at me, his expression had shifted slightly. There was something deeper there now, something I had never seen before. Respect. "It's done," he said softly. "Everything, from the estate to the properties, is now legally under your control." I nodded, absorbing the finality of the moment. There was no joy in it, No rush of victory. Just a quiet certainty. The weight of what I had just done didn't fully hit me yet. The realization that I was now in control, that everything George and I had built together was now mine to protect, was still sinking in. It wasn't the victory I had once imagined it would be. It was simply the truth. The world was different now. What happens next? I asked, my voice steady. Alan paused for a moment, considering his words carefully. Well, he began slowly. The legal documents are in place. The properties, the bank accounts, everything is now under your name. You can begin to act on them as you see fit. He gave me a quick glance before continuing. You have full control now, Eleanor. His words lingered in the air, their weight settling heavily around us. Full control. The phrase echoed in my mind, and for the first time, I allowed myself to feel the depth of it. I could feel the power that had been dormant in me for so long beginning to stir. But I didn't let it overwhelm me. There would be no hasty decisions, no rash actions. I had already seen the consequences of acting in anger. This wasn't about that. This was about asserting my authority, about protecting what was mine, what George and I had worked so hard for. I wasn't going to let it slip away because of some petty drama from my family. I'll need you to contact the estate manager, I said, my tone clear and direct. Let them know the changes are official. I'll be taking over from here. Alan nodded and pulled out his phone, already typing out a message. Of course, he said, his fingers moving quickly over the screen. I'll get everything started right away. The calmness in his voice was reassuring. He had been with George and me through so much over the years, and he knew me well enough to understand that I wasn't a woman to rush into things. When I made a decision, it was final. I watched as he typed, sending off the necessary message. I didn't need to speak further. Alan understood the gravity of the situation. He knew what I was capable of, and for once, I didn't need to prove it to anyone. The moment had come, and I had claimed what was rightfully mine. As Alan finished the final preparations, I felt a strange calm settle over me. The storm inside me, which had raged for so long, was finally quieting. This wasn't about revenge or anger. It was about reclaiming what was mine. This was my legacy, and I was fighting for it. After a few moments of silence, Alan finished his work and looked up at me. His expression held both admiration and understanding. Is there anything else? He asked. No. It's done, I replied, my voice steady. He closed his briefcase with a soft click. I'll be in touch if anything else comes up, he said, his tone now final. As he walked out the door, I stood there for a moment, letting the calm settle in. It was done. I was in control now. My family had no idea what was coming, and I wasn't about to let them take anything else from me. I returned home that afternoon, stepping through the door with a calm I hadn't known in years. The weight of what I had done still pressed on me, but there was no fear, no guilt. I had taken control of my life again, and everything was beginning to shift into place. Watching from my living room window, I saw Blake, Candace, and Trevor, my family, still under the illusion that they were in control. That would change soon. The phone started ringing just after dinner. I didn't answer. It wasn't for me anymore. Their voices carried tension, their calls growing more frantic as they tried to figure out why everything they thought was theirs was suddenly out of reach. Blake demanded answers, his voice sharp, while Candace, panic evident in her tone, left desperate messages for the property manager. Trevor's voice was quieter, but I could hear the rising panic behind his calm words. They were beginning to realize their control was slipping, and no one seemed able to explain why. I didn't rush to intervene. They were left scrambling, and I simply watched from the sidelines. They had spent years underestimating me, treating me as insignificant, but now they were about to learn what it meant to have their arrogance turned back on them. Justice came quietly, and with each frantic call, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. There was no malice in me, no pleasure in seeing them struggle. But I couldn't deny the satisfaction that filled me as I watched them unravel. They had thought they could push me out, keep me in the background, let me fade away. But that was over. I wasn't fading anymore. I didn't need to make them feel small. They were already doing that to themselves. I kept my calm, letting them twist in the wind for a little longer. The frustration in their voices echoed through the house, and for the first time, I didn't feel like the victim. I didn't feel weak or helpless. I felt relief that they were beginning to see the consequences of their actions. The consequences of thinking they could control everything without ever considering what it meant to truly honor the family. Their frantic behavior contrasted sharply with my quiet, calculated confidence. They were the ones who had been careless, who had thought they could take from me without facing any repercussions. Now they would understand that their actions had consequences. I would wait. I would let them sweat. I would let them chase their answers, chase the keys to the lives they had thought were theirs to control. And in the end, it would be me who held all the answers. I called the meeting the next morning, requesting that everyone gather at Blake's house. It wasn't a dramatic move, no grand gesture. I wasn't going to walk in and make some speech. I didn't need to. It was time for them to face the reality of what had already happened, and I wanted them to see it for themselves. There would be no shouting, no emotional games. I was done being dragged through the mess of their manipulations and expectations. I walked into Blake's house, calm and composed, the legal documents in my hands. I could feel their eyes on me as I entered, their familiar, dismissive expressions already in place. Blake looked up from his phone, Candace adjusted her posture, and Trevor shifted uncomfortably in his seat. They didn't know what was coming. They hadn't figured it out yet, but they would. Without a word, I placed the first document on the table, sliding it slowly across the polished surface in front of them. The silence between us stretched thin, like the calm before a storm, but the storm was already inside of me. There was no need for drama, no need for theatrics. They had already dismissed me once. They thought I had nothing left, nothing to offer. But the truth was in these papers, and I wasn't going to waste any more time trying to make them understand. This, I said quietly, my voice steady, is the power of attorney. It grants me full control of everything. I placed the second document down, watching their faces shift from casual indifference to sudden confusion. And this, I continued, is the transfer of all properties, accounts, and assets into my name. Everything George and I built is now mine. Legally, I am in control. Blake snorted, a short, dismissive laugh that held no real amusement. Candace rolled her eyes, clearly not understanding what was happening. Trevor shifted in his chair, trying to gauge the situation, but none of them spoke. They didn't know what to say. I could see the anger building in Blake's eyes, the arrogance that always came with a sense of entitlement. "You can't just do that," he muttered under his breath. "This isn't how it works." I looked at him calmly, letting his words hang in the air for a moment. Then, with quiet clarity, I said, "It works exactly how it's been set out. The documents are legally binding. There is no room for negotiation." Candace opened her mouth, but she quickly closed it when she saw the finality in my gaze. She tried again, her voice sharp, attempting to regain control of the situation. "You can't just," she began, but I cut her off with a single word. "I already have," I said, placing the final document on the table. The silence in the room was deafening. It wasn't the kind of silence that meant they didn't understand. It was the kind of silence that came when they realized they had already lost. They tried to argue, to challenge the legitimacy of the documents, but I didn't let them get far. The There was nothing they could say that would change the fact that I was now in control. No matter how much they protested, no matter how much they tried to twist the situation to suit their desires, it was already over. They had no more power. Only I did. I watched as Blake's face turned a deeper shade of red, his jaw tightening in frustration. Candace stood up, pacing, her eyes darting between the documents and me, but the confidence was gone from her movements. She was scrambling, trying to make sense of the shift, but she knew, deep down, that it was too late. Trevor remained silent, his usual indifference replaced with a quiet discomfort. And in that moment, I felt a surge of something stronger than satisfaction. It was clarity. It was power. I wasn't angry, not anymore. I wasn't seeking revenge or trying to get back at them for what they had done to me. I was simply asserting what was rightfully mine. The family I had built, the legacy George and I had created, was now in my hands. And there was no one who could take it from me. The widow had become the one in control, and no one would ever forget it again. In the days that followed, I watched from a distance as my family scrambled to undo what had already been set in motion. Blake, Candace, and Trevor were like cornered animals, doing everything they could to get back what they thought was rightfully theirs. They called lawyers, accountants, and financial advisors, trying to make sense of the mess they had found themselves in. I could hear their frantic calls from time to time, their voices rising in panic as they realized there was nothing they could do. Their plans had fallen apart, and the pieces were too scattered to put back together. I stayed quiet through it all. Not a word, not a single word to offer them. They had dismissed me for so long, treated me as invisible, and now they were learning the hard way that I wasn't invisible anymore. I didn't need to say anything. The weight of the situation had settled in on them, and I knew they would figure it out soon enough. But I wasn't interested in watching them crumble. I wasn't here to gloat, to rub their noses in their defeat. I had no interest in their pain or their frustration. For me, it wasn't about revenge, it was about peace. Finally, peace. For the first time in years, I wasn't looking over my shoulder, waiting for someone to take what was mine. I wasn't walking on eggshells, trying to avoid upsetting anyone. I was free. The family could stew in their panic for all I cared. They had thought they were entitled to everything George and I had built, but they had forgotten one thing. The real power wasn't in the assets or the property. The power was in the choices you made, the way you moved through the world. And I had made my choice. I had taken control, not out of spite, but out of necessity. I had taken control because I deserved it. I deserved to have what we built together, and I wasn't going to let anyone take it from me. As the days went by, the calls to their lawyers and financial advisors grew quieter. Their desperation had reached a peak, but the realization was setting in. They had lost. They had no claim, no leverage. It was over. I didn't celebrate their downfall. There was no satisfaction in seeing them squirm. I wasn't like them. They could carry on fighting, but I was done with that. I had what I needed now: control, peace, and the knowledge that I had made the right decision. They would have to live with the consequences of their actions. I was moving on, and as the finality of it all settled in, I found myself looking forward to the future, not at the wreckage of my past. The chapter with my family was closed. What came next was mine to write. I started rebuilding, but not the way I thought I would. The pieces of my life that had once been scattered, shattered even, began to come together in a way that felt right for me. I focused on using the power I had reclaimed to invest in myself. I hadn't realized until now how much of me had been lost in the shadows of others' expectations. Now, it was time to shine on my own terms. I began by supporting a charity that helped other widows, women like me who had been cast aside or forgotten. I wanted to give back, to show them that there was life after loss, that they didn't have to fade into the background. But I didn't stop there. I took my financial independence and began investing in my own business. I knew I could create something of my own, something that would stand as a testament to my strength, my resilience. The old me would have hesitated, would have second-guessed every move. But not anymore. I had already taken control once. And now, I was carving out a future where I could make my own decisions, follow my own path. I didn't look back at the unraveling of my family. It was gone and I was free. Personal growth became my new mission. I no longer felt trapped in a life defined by others. The chains that had once bound me were gone, and with each step forward, I felt lighter, stronger. The satisfaction of taking control, of rebuilding something from the ground up, became my new reality. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was thriving. It was my time to create something meaningful, and this time it would be all mine. As I sat in the quiet of my home, I couldn't help but reflect on everything I had achieved. I had come so far from the woman who had been silenced by her family's expectations, from the widow who was once relegated to the background, invisible and forgotten. Now, I stood in the fullness of my own power, with nothing but clarity and peace ahead of me. I had reclaimed my life, every piece of it. No more walking on eggshells, no more second-guessing myself or shrinking to make others feel comfortable. I had made the choice to take control, and in doing so, I had carved out a space that was entirely mine. There was nothing more to prove. The final act of my journey was simple yet definitive. I called a meeting with my family, not for a confrontation, but for closure. I placed the documents in front of them, calmly explaining the reality they could no longer deny. "This is my life now," I told them, my voice steady, "and you are no longer part of my journey." Their reactions were predictable: shock, frustration, and, as expected, attempts to negotiate. But there was no room for that anymore. I wasn't looking for their approval, and I didn't need their validation. I had already outgrown them, outgrown the emotional chains they had tried to bind me with. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about proving I was right. It was about the freedom that came with leaving the past behind. I had won back my peace, my identity, and my future. It was a quiet strength, the kind that resonated with the soul, and as I walked away from that meeting, I felt nothing but gratitude for how far I had come. This was my life now, and no one would ever take that from me again. Thanks for listening to me. I am more than thankful to you. If this story fascinated you anyway, kindly do subscribe to my channel. Like this video, also comment your thoughts on my story. I would love to hear from you. Once again, thank you so much.